1986. What a definitive year for RPGs, and a massive year for gaming in general. We saw the introduction of 2 new consoles, something you never see nowadays. We saw Sega's first attempt at the mainstream audience with the Master System. They had varying success with that. And we saw the legendary Atari come out with the 7800, one of their last main attempts at recapturing the market they once dominated. We saw legendary games like Metroid that would shape new worlds that we could have never previously imagined. Things that would directly carry over to the RPG world. And then other games like Bubble Bobble and Outrun that were just plain fun to play. In '86, we also saw the disk system released for Famicom. I think anybody who plays video games owes at least some credit to this year as being one of the most definitive years, not only in RPG history, but in video game history in general. '86 truly was an amazing year. In September of '86, we saw the most legendary RPG developer of all time form, pretty undebatably so, in Squaresoft by Masafumi Miyamoto. I think Square has produced more quality RPGs, especially JRPGs, than any 2 developers combined. Square is known for its legendary series such as Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, and Xenogears, just to name a few. For me, Square really is the groundbreaker of RPGs. Square is the company that can really go out there and afford to break grounds when it comes to creating new types of games, or even maximizing the graphical limits of a game. Look at Final Fantasy 15. The budget on that must have been amazing. The graphics were stunning. You don't really see that type of stuff in JRPGs because it is more of a niche genre. But because Square is so well banked, they can actually go out there and do things that the others can't, and I think that's important. Square also holds a unique ability to take risks as far as games that other people wouldn't try. Many developers can't afford to take a risk on a game that might fail, but Square has enough money in the bank that they can actually go out there and take these risks, knowing that at least a certain amount of people are going to buy the game just because it says Square on it. And that cannot be overstated. I really wish Square would actually go back to the days where it actually took even more risks, because that's when I think Square was at its greatest, and I think we all owe definitely a lot to Squaresoft as a developer. Arguably the greatest Western RPG developer of all time was also formed this year, by Chris Weaver in Bethesda, Maryland. And of course it is Bethesda. Now this developer has created some of the most iconic Western RPGs that have ever been made or ever been produced. Games like Skyrim, games like Oblivion, games like Fallout. And what I think this developer really stands out for, even from developers like Squaresoft, is creating immersive worlds. I can't think of a single developer that consistently goes out there and provides us with the environments that this developer does. Much like Squaresoft, when you see that Bethesda name on there, you know this game is quality. You know it's going to be something great. And Bethesda, they don't come out with games as often as Square does, but when they do, those games are amazing, I will say that. Along with Squaresoft, I really consider both of these companies almost to be ambassadors of RPGs. These are the companies that can make a game that will appeal to anyone. Someone who's maybe only plays sports games might pick up an RPG when they see the next Final Fantasy coming out, or they see the next Elder Scrolls game coming out. These developers truly do transcend the genre. Whether you consider this an RPG or not, The Legend of Zelda, created by Miyamoto and released in February '86, has had a long-lasting impact on the genre. In addition to creating one of the most iconic worlds and beloved characters, this is one of the first games to feature a save ability. Can you imagine an RPG today without the ability to save? The very definition of these games is that they take longer than one sitting to play. Could you imagine having to play Skyrim in one sitting? We'd probably die. Or our computers or Xbox 360s would probably catch on fire. And The Legend of Zelda did implement a couple of new things, like item gathering was perfected in this game, and like I said, the save ability. But I really think the biggest thing about this game, and the biggest impact that this game had on RPGs, was showing people what consoles could do. I think a lot of RPG developers before this kind of stayed clear of consoles. If you look at almost all the games from '84 and '85, those 2 episodes, they're almost all Japanese PC games. This was the first game, or one of the first games that actually came out on console, and this game looks spectacular. So I think it showed developers if Zelda could be created on this console, then pretty much anything could come to the consoles, and that changed the way people play video games. Zelda revolutionized RPGs, it's no debate. The other heavy hitter this year was Dragon Quest. Released for the Famicom, and also for the NES a couple of years later. You may know it as Dragon Warrior. But this game is considered to be the major forerunner to the modern JRPG. Incredibly, this game was able to acquire the creator of the Dragon Ball game, or Dragon Ball series, one of the most iconic animes of all time. And this was all done in an effort to make the RPG more approachable, or to appeal to a wider audience, and this game definitely hit the mark. This game was able to sell over 2 million copies at its time. We talked in '84 about selling 50,000 copies or 200,000 copies as a big accomplishment. This did 20 times that. How amazing is that? And you know, I think this game can be even seen today in today's modern RPGs or modern JRPGs. Look at pretty much any game coming out of Japan. They all have that anime aesthetic. And I think part of that is developed or inspired from this game here. This was something incredibly that wasn't really seen in Japan at the time. Many Japanese RPGs and Western RPGs were pretty much identical. But this is one of the first games that helped cause the divide between the two genres, and I think we're all the better for it because we all love choice. One of my favorite games this year was Starflight, made by Electronic Arts, EA. Back then, EA actually took risks and made awesome games. I wish they did that today. And this game was later released for the Genesis, but 5 years later in 1991, and that just showed how much further ahead PCs were than consoles at the time. This game really helped establish EA. It was incredibly successful, selling 100,000 copies in a year, and it would go on to sell over 1 million copies in its lifetime. And I think it's pretty easy to see why. You've seen with the success of games like No Man's Sky, I think a lot of people were craving something like this back then. I don't know, for me personally, games like Mass Effect where you explore space have always been my favorite types of RPGs. Hell, I even enjoyed No Man's Sky. But games like this, they really filled the niche, and this game helped develop the sandbox genre. I think that we owe a lot of credit to EA for making a game like this, and I wish they'd go back to making more games like this because this was truly an awesome game. Another legendary game this year was Wizard's Crown. Wizard's Crown has been described as arguably the hardest RPG ever made, and that's saying something. You know, tactical RPGs, they're always known for being challenging, and this just took it to the extreme. I think that's a good thing, but that's what people look for when they play these types of games, and I think it gives it long-lasting appeal. Combat in this game could even take up to 40 minutes. Imagine a game like that nowadays, where a single battle takes 40 minutes, it would be ridiculous. But I think all fans of tactical RPGs or strategy RPGs really owe a lot to this game because it really popularized the genre and made a lot of people develop for it. The third game developed by Square in the first RPG was Cruise Chaser Blasty. I know I butchered that, but this game was an amazing game at the time. It featured mechs, or giant robots where you would fight each other in a first-person view. If that wasn't cool enough, they were able to land Nobu Uematsu, the guy who is considered to be the Beethoven of RPG music. He would create so many soundtracks for the Final Fantasy games over the years, and many other games as well. You know, this game was a commercial success, but that's not really the reason it made it on this list. The reason it made it on this list is because it was so instrumental in getting Square off the ground, as well as featuring an iconic composer. I thought it would be impossible to tell the history of RPGs without at least mentioning this game. I think Cruise Chaser Blasty is revolutionary at its time. Two final things I wanted to mention was the Atari ST-1040, which would feature 1,000 kilobytes for $9.99. This was the first time you can get 1 kilobyte for under $1, and this put computers in the hands of people who otherwise couldn't afford them before. And also the most successful console add-on ever was the Famicom Disk System. It released only in Japan and would go on to sell 4 million copies, although unfortunately the NES never got it.